Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Voice of Authority webinar. My name's Toby Fox, and I'm the Managing Director at 3Fox, the marketing agency for councils. The webinar today is brought to you by HTA and 3Fox. Our job at 3Fox has been to keep our network of councils and developers and investors and their influencers and advisors connected. During coronavirus, we're doing that through a series of webinars that provide councils with a platform to discuss their ambitions, their challenges, influences, and issues of urgency. So next week, we're going to be asking what makes a good council investment strategy, bringing together Southwark and Brent councils and SIPFA and the consultant Montague Evans for what promises to be a fascinating discussion of successful outcomes in rebuttal to the recent findings of the Public Accounts Committee. That's next Thursday at 11 AM, and you can register for it at thevoiceofauthority.co.uk. But this week, we're diving back into the increasingly deep waters of council development companies. I say diving back as I've been organising workshops in which councils pass on best practice on direct delivery since 2015. And I published the step-by-step guide on how to set up a local housing company in 2017, written by the formidable Mark Bagent, who's created more council housing companies than I've had holidays in the last year, a lot more actually. And in the process of all that work, I was fortunate enough to meet Dr. Janice Morphet, who along with her colleague, Dr. Ben Clifford, has produced the definitive research in this field. Which councils are setting up companies? Why and what for? How? No one knows more answers to those questions or about the nuances involved than Janice. So when Janice says it's time to go again, then we know something's afoot. But what? That's what we're here to find out. And we're going to get some insight into how drastically changing circumstances, underlying trends, government policy and market evolution are influencing the direct delivery of homes by councils. We're going to discuss how council strength in this sector has matured, why nevertheless some councils are still not building homes, what support would give the biggest boost to direct delivery, and how councils collaborating or not to build scale. And in the process, we hope that you viewers will see the need for an update to Janice's research in this field, and that you'll want to participate with data or with funding or with both. And to stir you to open your corporate wallets, we're lucky enough to have joining Janice on our panel today, no less than Councillor David Renard, Chair of the Economy, Environment, Housing and Transport Board for the Local Government Association, as well as leader of Swindon Council. David's going to carry the weight of responsibility of talking on behalf of councils for this session, and we couldn't ask for a better man for the job. Representing the private sector today, it's a pleasure to welcome another long-standing friend in Mike Diath, partner at Architects HTA, and leading supporter of off-site manufacturing methods to deliver homes of quality at scale. You might recognise Mike as the co-author with Mark Farmer of a report launched 10 days ago called Build Homes, Build Jobs, Build Innovation, which was widely reported in the media and I'm told has made a substantial impact in government. If we're lucky, Michael will post a link to that report so you can download it via the chat function on your screens today. Meanwhile, to talk about an acclaimed joint venture or set of joint venture between the public and private sectors, we've got Alex Eisted, Integrated Strategic Business Director at Morgan Sindall, who I've been lucky enough to work with both in Slough and in Hertfordshire. So what a panel, ladies and gentlemen. Your screens are fairly bursting with the knowledge that our panelists are bringing to the party today, and I urge you to make the most of it. Use the Q&A function to fire in your questions. It's easier for us to manage that than use the chat function, although we'll check both for your comments. And at around 10:45, we'll open up the floor and put the most popular questions to our panel. We're also going to survey you with a couple of snap polls to identify where you feel research might be most helpful. But first, let's start accessing some of the insight and experience on the panel today, beginning at the sharp end with the topic of resources. David, turning to you, how have council and council development company expertise grown as direct delivery has spread? And do you feel that councils have sufficient resources to ramp up delivery?
Yeah, thanks, Toby, and good morning, everybody. So, of course, a lot of councils have not yet set up special purpose vehicles for this. So it's fair to say all councils are at different points in the journey. And lots of councils, including my own in Swindon, set up a special purpose vehicle really initially as a way of generating some additional income for the council to help fund services when we found that our resources were being diminished through the government's rebalancing of the country's finances program. So that was probably the initial reason for setting it up, and it's fair to say that it's taken a lot longer to get up and running than we'd originally anticipated, for some of the reasons that we're probably going to talk about today. But I think perhaps the reason for doing it has shifted a bit now. It's not just about delivering some money into the council coffers. It's also about delivering the right homes for the right people. So we're spending quite a lot of time at the moment developing housing for the older people, vulnerable groups with particular needs. But coming on to the question specifically about the resources, councils have to spend time building up the capacity to deliver these, as we found here. And so resources or financial resources is the obvious starting point for addressing this, and you've got to put some upfront money to get all this going before you get a return, and that can be a challenge. So I think the first thing you've got to do is accept that you can't do it all on your own as a council. The council house building has been in the doldrums for the last 40, 50 years, and if we're going to ramp it up, whether it be through the HRA or through special purpose vehicles, then we need that expertise and capacity. So that's where partners come in. We're working with Wilmot Dixon at the moment on a particular scheme, and you've got to have strong relationships with them. They've got to be on board with the agenda of what you're trying to deliver and what you're trying to achieve. Finance is part of it. I mean, additional support from government would certainly not go amiss, and as the local government association, both on the general fund front and the HRA front, we're lobbying for those additional resources to provide those additional houses that we know that people need and want to live in, but also to make them appropriate for the needs of those individuals. And then, of course, you get onto the subject of skills. We know there's probably a need for a lot more skills and training in this arena to enable councils to have the capacity, or indeed for the market to supply the capacity. So we've got to work much more closely with training providers and others as well to make sure that the curriculum is there as well. So I suppose in summary, I'd say there's got to be the political will, firstly. There's got to be the finances in place. You've got to have some good partners on board, and you've got to have the right skills mix in your area to deliver it.
Thanks very much, David. Janice, what are your observations on the capacity of councils to ramp up direct delivery? Well, I think we might have lost Janice briefly. So let's turn to Mike and Alex. Mike, have you got any observations to make about the capacity of councils that you're coming into contact with to ramp up delivery at the moment?
Yeah, I'm just going to comment briefly because Janice is back, but I think that it's a very, very fast trajectory for councils. So over the last 4 years, they've had to move very quickly. So David has rightly pointed to the need to have partners and so on. But Janice, I'm going to hand back to you because it's more important to hear from you on this than me, I think.
All right, thanks very much. Sorry about that. Well, good morning, everybody. And I think really, firstly, it's great to hear what David's been telling us about Swindon. And I think from our last 2 rounds of research, what we've seen is this kind of flowering and developing with each council, if you like, expanding its own resources and experience and kind of adding different models and methods to their housing provision activity. So that's really, really great to hear. And what we found is that in terms of the sharing, in addition to those models that David has mentioned, we're finding that councils are starting to share resources in terms of people. So, for example, we found that those councils more effective at delivery were having these kind of multi-professional teams with housing, planning, legal, finance, transport, all working together and kind of building up from there with strong political leadership. But now we're finding, say, that in Hackney, where they've been working on that approach for a number of years, they're beginning to share that with Camden and Islington. So that's just one example. But we have examples where councils are sharing development surveyors with private sector experience, very, very important in making these things work in a positive way. But obviously, when you start, you can't employ someone full time. So, you know, sharing a contract, taking some time from a partner's development surveyor and so on. So all these models to make resources work whilst you're expanding seem to be supporting delivery. So I think I'm really just going to echo what David said, that you kind of have to go one step at a time, and each council needs to think about why it's doing it. And I agree, you know, we found many councils initially going for the resources and thinking about finance, but then thinking about housing need and, you know, how what provision is available locally to meet what's required. So, and we found 78% of councils had some form of company. That doesn't mean to say they're all active in using them, but nevertheless, we think it's time to go out and find out a bit more about what's happened in the last couple of years and how that's developing, which is why we're really keen to go and do another piece of research.
I'm going to come back to that any second now, Janice, on the basis of a question that's just come in from a viewer. But can you just give us a little a sort of a state of play update on why councils set up these companies?
I think they've set them up for a range of reasons, because the companies aren't all the same. I mean, some are around buying secondary properties for homelessness. Some have been to promote new development. Some have been partnerships and JVs, as we've heard. Some have been just for management and taking on broader management responsibilities across their council's own stock and other stock. So they're doing it because it gives them some freedom. And obviously the difference between a council company method. In fact, you don't need a company to build housing. You can just build it on the general fund. But it's obviously different from the housing revenue account, because there you always have that risk of right to buy. And a lot of councils still, I think, faced with a choice, having started with a company and now having the opportunity of right to buy. I mean, I'd be interested to hear what others say about this, but we haven't found a lot of councils going back to right to buy exclusively. They're still deploying it where they can. Only 48% of councils have actually got the ability for the HRA as well. So
I was going to say it's early in the process to be involving the views, but Stephen Boxall's pointed out that you've got councils on the one hand with sort of social homes being the most urgent need, but on the other hand, often setting up housing companies in order to provide income for general funds. So is the balance of those sorts of the drivers for setting up companies, is that changing as our circumstances have changed over the last sort of 6 to 12 months, do you sense?
Well, my sense is that councils haven't just been building for sale. And I think that, or even when they did start for that, I can think of some councils we looked at in 2017 had really started that reason, which is what David said about income. But gradually they've changed to looking at meeting different kinds of need. And so where there is housing for sale, it's often for cross subsidy, so that it's just making the development work. Although there are some parts of the country where they're building, up in the northeast, for example, where they're building executive homes because the house builders aren't building those. And if they don't build them, they're losing their young families. So it's very local. And I think it would be very wrong to say that councils are just building homes to generate income. I mean, think about homelessness. Lots of councils are paying out huge amounts to landlords. Then why not actually buy property and have much better housing for your homeless families, and actually have the income and the asset. So I think that's the kind of thing that's going on. And I think the idea that councils are just building for sale and making vast profits is really not what we found at all.
David, I'll come to you for a second to enable you to comment on that. But first, Janice, you mentioned that 78%, I think, of councils had set up a housing company the last time you did your research. Obviously, direct delivery is a maturing scene now. We've been working on it. I've been working on it since 2015, but some councils are still not involved. And what are the reasons for that, do you think? And how is that picture changing, do you sense?
Well, I think some councils felt that they were uncertain. They thought it was too expensive. But for example, two big councils, Manchester and Leeds, were very much looking at other methods. But now they've both decided that they're going to look at setting up companies. So I'm not sure they've done it yet, or they're going to go through with it, but they've decided to move on that front. So I think what we've tried to do in our work is to enable councils to learn from each other. I mean, that's the important thing. That's why we produced, when we did the 100% survey, we put all the web links in, so if you're interested in what this council's doing because you think it's like you can go and click and have a look and then talk to them. So we've been trying to share confidence, share experience, because in my experience in local government, which is for many years, actually I think most councils do learn from each other, and councillors listen to other councillors and they want to know how it's happened. And so gradually we get more confidence and more experience being shared. So I think that obviously we don't know how many councils are not doing it now, and that's really what we'd like to know. But we also want to know, what's successful, what more could be shared amongst the sector, so that we can all move on and do more.
Great, thanks, Janice. So David, a couple of threads there. How many councils are still not involved in direct delivery? Does 78% sound like it's probably still current? And what are the blockers? Is it really just about sharing experience and building confidence, or are there any other structural blockers?
Yeah, I'm happy to go along with Janice's analysis on numbers of councils who actually have direct delivery organisations. I haven't got the exact number, but that sounds about right. The issue I'd really like to pick up on is the fact that the reason that councils are doing this, because it's one string to a bow, and as I said, it was originally about delivering some money to the bottom line for councils to invest in other things, but it's partly about offsetting expenditure as well. So I gave the example of older people's housing. So if you are sending people out of borough, or people have particular specific needs that you're having to meet in the private sector, if you build your own houses and you take a rent from them, not only are you getting an income, but also you're reducing your outgoings as a local authority. And also, Janice referred to right to buy and councils buying back properties. The issue the LGA has with right to buy is that they don't get to keep all of the income that's generated from right to buy. And therefore, the ambition to replace one for one in terms of their stock is not achievable. So we've been lobbying the government for quite some time to say, let us keep all the money, and then we can deliver those. And my own authority has also done some buyback or buying in of properties into the HRA in order to help meet that need and reduce costs. So direct deliveries are really important for me, at least. And I think for local government generally, it's a really important string to the bow to achieve lots of different things.
Thanks, David. Mike, Alex, if there's anything you'd like to pick up on in these themes, then give us a wave and join in. Yeah, Mike.
Look, a really interesting discussion. And I think that the reason we're so keen on the work that Janice is doing is it gives evidence to what we see on a day-to-day basis as designers working with local authorities. We see huge ambition and there's some income generation aspirations, but actually doing housing because it's the right thing for local authorities to do is a massive motivator. And because they haven't done it for such a very, very long time. What we have is a sort of a lag of confidence, really. And actually, the reason that Janice's work is so important is it galvanizes people. They can see that others are doing it, and they can see how they can cut corners by not reinventing wheels and so on, hopefully. And I think that there's a big discussion to be had on that. And we can see some fantastic results with 50% affordable housing where there is sale housing. And the private sector struggles sometimes to do things that local authorities have shown they can do on small sites, for instance. So there's definitely a leadership role here in municipal housing, leading the way in terms of housing delivery for the future.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think just to pick on David's points around training and make sure that we've got the right sort of talent there. What we've seen with the authorities who we're working with, the skills are there. It's just quite often it needs a bit of a boost to increase numbers and perhaps diversify some of that skill. So there's a real opportunity with the property partnerships that we look to form to identify that sort of wider talent pool and bring them in to deliver the housing targets. But in doing so, it's not a case of taking control away. So I think that's the real balance, when forming these companies, just to make sure that governance is set right and that things are delivered to suit the council's objectives, but that they're buying into the private sector skill set also.
When you say diversifying skills, Alex, what sort of areas are councils most in need of help in that sense?
I think generally it falls to the development management skill set. So there's that very quickly can be bolstered, but also beyond that in terms of getting to the delivery. So as you said, I work for Morgan Civil Construction, so bringing in that expertise early in terms of cost certainty and design. And I think we'll probably come on to it later on in the discussion, but how we can get the most efficient delivery models for the new homes. So perhaps challenging the way we've done it traditionally and making sure that technology is embraced. So that's the sort of thing that we can look to bring. Great
stuff, Alex. David, we've had some comments there about leadership, and that I guess there's a way in which that affects the sort of exchange of information and the forums that are available. Is there a role for the LGA in helping make sure that information is all disseminated and that councils have the confidence that their fellow councils are on the same paths?
Yes, I mean, as Janice referenced earlier on, there's a huge amount of sharing that goes on. The LGA runs a very wide range of courses which people can sign up for. They also run peer review, inspection is not the right word, but a peer review process to go into other councils and exchange knowledge and experience and help to councils to improve. So the LGA, probably about half the work actually that the LGA does is around sharing best practice and making sure that everybody can take advantage of it. But ultimately, of course, there are political choices to be made, and there are also local needs choices to be made. And of course, not surprisingly, Local Government Association is very keen that a lot of these decisions are made locally, because the people on the ground in those areas know what is best for their particular areas. And as Janice referenced earlier on, there are maybe some areas which are short of 5-bedroom executive homes. And it's councils on the ground who can determine that need, and elsewhere it'll be different.
Is there a sense, David, in which councils that had a development company during the pandemic's sort of initial months, when local authority staff were all being requisitioned into emergency response activity, development companies actually stood aside from that to an extent, so that they were able to keep focusing on housing and on delivery, rather than be drawn into the sort of emergency response? And was that an advantage, and did that have a noticeable effect in housing activity?
I think that's a very difficult question to answer at this moment in time. We probably haven't got enough evidence on that, but yes, certainly it was an area of activity that continued. Areas of staff in other areas were redeployed, as you quite rightly say, but housing need doesn't go away. So even through a pandemic, you need to carry on with that work, and most planning departments found a way of continuing to operate all the way through it.
This is great stuff, Janice. We're uncovering all these different aspects of research that's needed. So the sort of progress that development companies were making throughout the pandemic, because they were separated out from mainstream council activities, if I can put it like that. Did you get a sense that was what was happening?
Yes, and also, I mean, I think we have to remember that quite a lot of councils during the pandemic have been approached by developers to take on their sites or half-completed developments, and certainly I heard of one council that got 4 different propositions within a week. So I think, although I know we've been round this route before about government providing an opportunity for housing associations to, if you like, help the market when it's in a time of uncertainty. And I know there are various views about that, but certainly I know some councils feel that having additional funds and government support to take that on would, they've got the capability to do that now, which perhaps they wouldn't have done 2 or 3 years ago. So I think, I don't know if that will happen, but certainly the private sector seems to think that councils would be able to do that. So they have some confidence perhaps, or perhaps they just need to get out of a tight corner themselves. But certainly we've heard, for example, I mentioned Manchester and Leeds and housing companies. We've had, for example, Bromley Council has, I think, decided to open an HRA again, particularly around providing for homeless people. We've had Southwark thinking about establishing a DLO to start building directly. And so I think all over the country, when you hear, I mean, obviously we don't have the survey data, so this is anecdotal. I can't say any more than that. But all the stories I hear is that the activity is strengthening, and whether that's because I think is that I'll just echo the point David made, which is that housing need hasn't gone away, and although there have been certain stays on people being made homeless during the pandemic, I think all councils are aware of the fact that that's going to come to an end and there's going to be a big issue. So I do think there's that sense of urgency of being on the front foot, not being on the back foot, has been a big driver as well.
Viewers, hopefully all of this is encouraging you to get involved in Janice's next research project. So if that's the case, we are going to put you in touch with her after this event. Make sure that that you can reach out to her. If you'd like to express your intention to fund or get involved in the research, do feel free to let us know via the chat. And we got some great questions coming in, so we'll be tending to those very shortly. But first, Janice, you've raised the issue of government support there, and we've sort of touched on it tangentially already. But David, is it your understanding that direct delivery has full support from this government?
I've got no reason to think it hasn't. I think there's quite a lot of other priorities that they're focusing on at the moment, not least the planning reforms agenda, which is, I think, probably uppermost in their mind at the moment. But there's obviously a separate discussion to be had around the HRA and delivery of social housing that way. But in terms of direct delivery companies, I think the big area where government could provide support is around infrastructure. Certainly in my own area, at the moment we're developing relatively small sites or regenerating existing sites. So access to those sites and all of the utilities and the road access, etc., is already there. But I think if we're going to scale this up, then we do need that government support for new roads and the utility companies to come on board with providing services to open up additional, perhaps larger areas.
Has lifting the HRA cap had any noticeable effect?
Well, I think it has. It's been welcomed widely by local government. It has opened up the possibility of more resources that local councils can draw on. But of course, in terms of HRAs, you've got your 30-year business plan and you've got to make it stack up over that period. A lot of councils were given debt a number of years ago. Those that didn't transfer their stock to housing associations So my own council, for example, had to take on £150 million worth of government debt at the time, of which we're gradually repaying. So, you've got to spread your resources across the whole financial picture, whilst aiming to deliver more social homes, which we know people need. And of course, ultimately, that's good for the exchequer, because if we house people in social housing on social rents or even affordable rents, that costs the taxpayer a lot less than paying to put people into private rented accommodation.
Janice, do you want to pick up on that, on the HRA cap being lifted and the effect that might have had, but also on the sort of wider sense of government support for direct delivery, because it's been a sort of grey area for a few years.
Yeah, I agree, and I think I would echo. I'm not sure we've had any statements saying, this is definitely government policy. But on the other hand, I think informally, I've had quite a lot of positive feedback, both with advisors and officials. In terms of, I think, right to buy, which it's been scrapped in Wales and Scotland. I think that would be the big motivator for councils to use the HRA, and even if it could be set aside for developments, being undertaken now and having some kind of protection from that might make a big difference. But I think the other kind of support that we've looked for and suggested to government is, well, firstly around finance, changing the rules on international financial reporting standards, so councils are not really, they can use the whole of their asset base to leverage finance on a prudential basis, but actually councils can only use part of their asset base to do that. And if they're going to act like a private company, which the 2011 Act suggests they should be able to do, then actually that would give more financial capacity. We've also said that the Homes and Communities Agency could do a lot more, particularly I think around providing support in London. When the mayor got his funding, which he gave to local authorities for social housing, he put alongside that a capacity fund, so that the assumption was if you got extra money to build social housing, you wouldn't then just be expected to know how to do it, that he gave you extra resources. And we see a lot of need for this across the rest of the country. I mean, it'd be great if the HCA could start giving allocations in a similar way for social housing in a more systematic way. I mean, the thing about the HIF fund, I know David mentioned infrastructure, but it seems mostly to go to greenfield sites, and we know quite a lot of development isn't in greenfield sites, and so that needs addressing. But also if there could be a more general rollout of support for skills capacity from the HCA, that would, I think, be very welcome across the board, and it would very much hasten and enhance the capacity of councils, even if they do it jointly in some way, set up joint teams. That would be great, I think.
Thanks, Janice. I think our viewers are reflecting your views. I think there's a sort of almost a 50-50 split in their responses to what sort of government support would be most welcome around removal of right to buy and increases in subsidy. And I think it was sort of 40% of viewers were saying that the support that they most needed in order to ramp up housing was around finance. So definitely echoing the panel's views. Okay, that's great stuff. Don Alexander, thank you for your very supportive message. Very glad your career is being stretched by your work at Gorham Homes. Helen Blackith, you raised your hand. I'm really sorry. Regular viewers will get used to hearing this from me. I'm very autocratic about these sessions. We don't invite viewers to share the stage. We're here to hear from our panel. But if you would like to put a question to the panel, we're very happy to receive that through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Mike, Alex, do feel free to pick up on any of the threads that we've heard in the last sort of 10 minutes. But also, could you engage Mike in the first instance around how important it is for councils to kind of come together and aggregate demand so that you can get new and more effective methods of construction moving at scale? And do you see evidence of it happening?
Well, yes, I certainly see evidence of it happening. Thank you, Toby. Look, I think the really interesting thing that we're in these terrible times that we're in, I mean, the challenges we face, is that we've experienced 6 months where collaboration has been the key. And one of the things that we were discussing before this session, the panelists were discussing, was that the opportunity to think a bit is sort of largely gone at the moment because we've all got used to Teams and so on. But at the beginning, there was time to think. So I spent some time with Mark Farmer thinking this through a bit, particularly about offsite and particularly modular homes. And it seems to us that one of the great potentials that local authority interest in housing delivery has is the potential to give modular manufacturing the things that they most want, which is a clear, visible, long-term pipeline of work that they can scale up into. So the exercise that we went through in the report that has been referenced was looking at the evidence base for that, talking to manufacturers and local authorities and so on. And the evidence is there. I think that if we can get local authorities to do more in terms of collaborating, and I mean coming up with pooling land, programmatic responses to land, actually coming up with some common standards, and I'm not talking about cookie cutter housing, I'm talking about standardization of certain aspects, and creating a pipeline which is appropriate for modular delivery. Then we can scale up modular manufacture, and we calculate that if we do that, we could get up to 75,000 additional homes a year, made in factories, beautiful homes, designed well, appropriate for local locations, and employing up to 50,000 people. Now, I could have said this a year ago and it wouldn't have the resonance that it has now, but actually the need for jobs, the need for innovation and the need for housing, and actually the stewardship, the schooling that the local authority sector has given themselves over the last 5 or 6 years, puts them in a fantastic time to be at the forefront of this delivery. It's genuinely exciting. And I do think the government has got an ear open to this. And so Janice's work, in my part, is absolutely essential. A government wants evidence, needs evidence to make decisions. And if we can evidence the growth and actually point to where collaboration is happening and ask for that to be further incentivized through funding or through whatever, through land, through expertise being given, then I think we can do something spectacular. Because much as I am very grateful for having a fantastic career over the last 35 years, we haven't delivered many homes. And actually it's pretty galling that last year, no, not galling, actually it's a huge indication of success of house builders, that last year 10 house builders built half of the homes in the country. You know, it's 10 organisations. And they are fantastic, and we celebrate them. And just think what we can do if we can get local authorities to collaborate, to come together, to share, not all reinvent individual wheels, to collaborate on supply chains and to buy into off-site and modular delivery. We can scale up, we can do this, we can come out of this COVID position with new jobs and better homes and lower carbon homes. And that's the challenge that we've set to the government, and I think that they're half listening. So Janice's work is very much the next step in this.
Yeah, and I think just to build on what Mike's saying there, you know, the experience that we're having with working with our council partners, it's allowing us, because we're in forming these long-term partnerships, we're able to bring our supply chain in. So it's not just the expertise, you know, at the first point of contact, it's that wider skill set who we work with. MMC, you know, whether it be sort of modular volumetric or sort of componentized, as you say, Mike, it's absolutely should be the first port of call. So, you know, when we're reviewing the designs, it's making sure that we're all involved at first principles. And I think that again is something where we've seen real sort of traction and better solutions for housing delivery come forward. So it's certainly not the cookie cutter as you suggest. I don't think we necessarily want to get near that, because you want to make sure that, again, the council's wider vision is being achieved, you know, and we're creating real communities and a mixture of housing stock to suit that. So would absolutely encourage that. I think the partnership, as I say, that enables real investment from private sector also, you know, for the obvious reasons. If you can see that pipeline of work ahead and understanding what that looks like, it does allow for that real investment and research and development in the best solutions.
Can I, so if I may, I just say to Alex that I know that Morgan Sindler are involved with Hertfordshire, And again, Hertfordshire, and I know there are many local authorities who've got fantastic examples, but in our research, Hertfordshire and the work they're doing to get local authorities to collaborate and working with the LEP and other interested parties, they've done a lot of good groundwork there. And I know that you have a relationship with them driving their housing targets as well. So, there are definitely examples that you can point to where this is beginning to happen.
Yeah, absolutely, and that that ranges from your more difficult kind of infill sites through to large scale urban extension. Really is the full range. Yeah.
Well, it's heartening to hear that the work in Hertfordshire is being received so well, having been part of helping them develop a joint narrative, a combined narrative to approach the private sector with. So it's good that that's been well received. And we Hertfordshire have been really active over the last few weeks. There are lots of webinars available through the Voice of Authority channel on YouTube about the work they've done to come together and aggregate demand. But David, we've heard that the private sector is urging councils to work together, urging councils to aggregate demand, urging councils to build to scale and work at scale. What's your sense of how the government drive to devolution and creating unitary and combined authorities is moving forward, and what sort of capabilities are being embedded as that happens? Is this an opportunity to make sure those new formations of local government are embedded with the skills that we need to deliver at scale and pace?
Well, of course, the devolution white paper has been pushed back a few months. So I think, given the other priorities that the government has at the moment, that's taking a little bit more of a back seat. And they only appear to be now looking at or devolution or local government reorganisation in areas where there's a clear willingness amongst all the participants to participate in that. So I think we'll have to wait and see on how that one works out. In terms of the private sector encouraging councils, I think in many cases there's an open door there. So I don't, I think it's just a case of having the conversations and seeing what works in each local area. And Alex has got a great example with Hertfordshire there of how it can be done. I did want to quickly just comment on MMC though, because councils are very keen to bring forward MMC development to help deliver quality homes at pace. But the issue there has been, it's been difficult to establish finance for such schemes because there's a lack of long-term data on the durability of MMC homes. Yes, I think in principle we would like to deliver a lot more, but the reality is until that data is available, that's going to be a challenge.
And I'll just pick up on
Mike,
that.
Yeah, I thought you might.
David, obviously I'd like to discuss that after this as well, but the homes that we're designing are designed for a 60-year life and beyond, and are warranted and mortgageable, and are actually, in hindsight, when you look at what's been constructed traditionally in social housing in particular, and even shared ownership and so on, it's not been without problems. And I think that one of the answers is precision manufacture. Let's get people working in good environments, in jobs which they can commute to, in factories which are appropriate, shall we say, for all skills and all ages and all genders and so on, to work in the sector. I think that we can be a progressive housing delivery sector in the local authority and public sector and really drive this industry forward.
Thanks, Mike. Janice, any comments or observations from you on aggregation, on the idea of local authorities coming together to aggregate demand and help support private sector's calls for longer pipelines and wider pipelines?
I think this is happening on a kind of, on a local basis. So I think if you look at the approach of councils developing their approach to housing and the way in which they're flowering different methods and building one on another, then I think it would be quite hard for a top-down approach to say you must aggregate, because I think that might delay things. And we were talking earlier about what's putting councils off. So I think the important thing is to kind of see where that matters. For example, if you think about Cheltenham and Tewkesbury, the Golden Valley development, which is next to GCHQ, is going to be both economic and housing, and goes into Tewkesbury. So that's a good example where that's being supported by the LEP, as in Hertfordshire, and also by Homes England. Sorry, I mentioned it, I gave the wrong name before. So, so I think what we're looking at is a kind of the LEPs possibly taking, until we get, if we do get combined authorities taking a bigger role, and we see that around Oxford as well, Oxford City, and some of the surrounding authorities, and linking planning to delivery through that funding mechanism. So I think each case is different, and it rather depends on what you're trying to achieve. I mean, certainly around Bristol, for example, then I know that Bristol, just trying to think, South Gloucestershire and Bath and North East Somerset, the three authorities in the combined authority, have actually got some interesting relationships with each other. So I think that they're developing in each other's areas, they're taking stock in perpetuity in return for investment. So and that's about meeting different kinds of housing needs on their borders. So I think that, you know, there are some interesting examples which I think need to be teased out more, because as councils get more into this, they want to have a bit more detail about how it's being done and the options. And you know, we haven't got that far yet in our research to really talk that through. But certainly last time, one of our examples was case studies with Slough, which is one of Alex's partners. And of course in Slough, they've got an HRA, they've got 2 specialist housing companies, and they have the JV with Morgan Sindall. So that is sort of becoming a more typical model, where you're running these things in parallel, but you're doing them for different purposes, I think. And working with your neighbour, we know, would be one of those, I think.
That's great.
Yeah, we're seeing more of that in terms of working with the neighbour in procurement-wise. So Brentwood is our most recent joint venture, and the way that was procured, it actually gives access for 12 other local authorities, sort of adjoining authorities, to form their own joint venture without having to go through the, I guess, the length and expense of a full OJU, because it's already been procured in that way. So you're kind of forming a framework for smaller scale JVs to be formed.
Yeah, interesting stuff. And there's a question in from Andy Sage, and I think it's echoed by another viewer, Stephen Boxall as well, has a sort of similar question. What appetite, Janice, have you found in your research in the past for councils to support community-led housing projects, particularly? And Stephen Boxall says, are local authorities getting involved with helping self-build and community build, and getting SME builders to become SME developers in this space, supporting councils?
I think all of the above, but all in different places. So, for example, some councils have definitely decided that they're part of their strategy, their sort of the social dimension, which I think social motivation, which David mentioned at the outset, is to work with small builders, but also architects and other local professional teams. So they see that very much as part of the outcome. If we think about community interest companies and working with community development, I think a lot of councils are doing that on specific sites. As things stand at the moment, it's not going to be the only method available. It's there, but it sits alongside other methods, I think, because it depends on the site, it depends on who wants to support it. If we look at self-build, then obviously we have councils looking at their own small sites very frequently, and making those available for self-build, as well as what's happening in Oxfordshire. Charwell's actually got a larger development of opportunities for self-build. So I think all of those things are there, but they're alongside other types of development, whether that's for older people. I mean, if you look at Wigan, Wigan are doing fantastic things around housing and integrated social care. And if you don't know about the Wigan deal, there's a really good report on the King's Fund that really tells you about how you can, because in Wigan, all their population growth is through longevity. It's not through immigration or birth rates. 5 councils in Greater Manchester, their population is going up only because people are living longer. So they've really decided that they're going to sort of close their minds to everything. That's really what they're going to focus on. So I think it's the local issue again. Keep coming back to local issues, and as housing offers solutions to these local issues, but they will be tailored to what's actually going on and what the challenges are, I think.
Thanks, Janice. So David, feel free to pick up on any of those threads, but also I'll put to you a question from Danny Kay, which is around collaboration with FE and universities, between them and local authorities and the private sector to deliver long-term skills training and apprenticeships, maybe for architects, for project managers, for all those sort of skill sets that are needed by councils to ramp up delivery. Is that something that the LGA might have a role in?
Well, it's certainly an issue that needs addressing. We need to make sure that FE and HE establishments are delivering the right training for the local area and the businesses that are operating in them. But of course, local authorities don't have a huge amount of influence or particular role when it comes to HE and FE. So it's a real challenge, but it's certainly an issue that needs addressing. And just picking up on Janice's points, I mean, I agree with everything she said. I've just got a reflection on the self-build issue. Certainly in my area, we had a site identified for self-build for a number of years, and for various reasons, we just couldn't get it off the ground, even though we are the home of the National Self-Build Centre in Swindon. And in the end, we are now developing it ourselves. It's part of our development programme. So councils have got to make choices, as Janice said, and you've got to do what you think is best for your own area. But of course, if there are particular challenges that make one course of action more difficult than others, then local authorities, particularly when finances are tight, are going to look for the course of least resistance.
Thanks, David.
Toby, that if councils use the Social Value Act 2012, it's called Public Services bracket Social Value Act, but anyway, then actually you can tie in apprenticeships and other other aspects of training into your contracts when you let them. So, for example, Birmingham is funding 100 apprenticeships through this method, and there's some of them trades and some of them professional apprenticeships. So I think there's quite a lot that can be done. Stockport actually has a whole construction team made up of ex-offenders, for example. So I think that training dimension can be included. And I don't know that a lot of councils have really become fully aware of the breadth and scale of what they can do under the Social Value Act. So if you haven't looked at that, I'm sure people are using it, but if you haven't, it's definitely worth a look to see the extent of the powers available to you to build these things into contracts.
Fantastic, Janice. Thanks. Alex, you wanted to come in there?
Just to say, we'd be very keen to support on that. We do an awful lot of work with further and higher education and local authorities on that training and provide an opportunity. So we're doing a lot of work with Department of Work and Pensions as well to create opportunities and work experience placements for those who are out of work. But also, you mentioned ex-offenders, but also ex-forces. So the work we do with Build Force and organisations like that, there are an awful lot of sort of routes and initiatives out there to try and generate that new skill set within the industry. So be happy to share any further details if anybody was interested out there.
Great stuff, Alex. Thanks a lot. And this is all being echoed by our viewers. We've got questions in from Claire Benny and others all around the same issues. That the biggest challenge that they see in working with local authorities. Claire says she's now worked alongside 6 London authorities on new homes programs. The biggest challenge is to grow more and more rounded leaders, project managers from the bottom up. Mike, you wanted to come in on this?
Yeah, I did, because I did want to just bring us back to the space we're currently occupying, which is the COVID space. This is a once in 100 years event happening to us all. And we have a lot of stimulus bubbling around at the moment, and there's a lot of people selling a lot of homes very quickly, and you'll begin to hear, I think, about now that actually first-time buyers are beginning to find it harder to get mortgages, and actually that stimulus is only running to the end of March in the sale sector. And we're already, and one of the questions picks this up, we're already seeing a drop-off in starts, housing starts. And if you look at every recession, the last recession, we had a 60% drop-off in housing starts, 60%. It may not be that bad, because I think there's more money around this time around. It may not be that bad, but we've got to deliver somewhere in the region of 300,000 homes a year. And despite government figures that show that we're delivering over 200,000, they factor in all of the offices that have been converted and all those sorts of things. And new build delivery still is well under 200,000 a year. If we're seriously going to address the issues that we're going to be confronting coming out of this, economic and otherwise, somewhere we need an industrial strategy that delivers more and more productively. And that's why we wrote the report. That's why we think the link with MMC, the understanding of the benefits of it, and actually the promotion of it by aggregation and coming together of local authorities is so important. So where there is good examples, the reason we're shining a light on those good examples is we need a massive scaling up of that. It's not one or two. This has got to be a big thrust of local authority housing delivery over the next 10 years coming together, because we're in an emergency and the house builders are going to take a long time to get back to the delivery that they were doing last year. So we have to look at the new areas, and local authorities, for me, are a big part of that answer.
Thanks, Mike. And putting it back to you, Mike, I'm going to put you on the spot now. So Janice is endeavouring to get another research programme underway. We're going to look at what's new around councils building homes, around direct delivery. What one or two things would you most like to find out from a new round of research? And I'm going to come around the whole panel with the same question.
Was that to me first, Toby?
To you, Mike. Yeah. What one or two things would you most like to know?
Well, I do believe that you can't instruct people to do anything. You can't tell people to collaborate, and you can't tell people to aggregate. So I think that if the survey could see where there is interest, people want to develop, but they know it's going to take them 4 or 5 years to get into the position of delivering homes, that they want to come together with people that are already doing it. They might have land. There might be coalitions with housing associations in the private sector, but leadership, political leadership within local authorities that wants to do more and actually increase housing delivery. We haven't got time really to fight every site and so on. It's got to be going with the grain of people who are actively, progressively interested in fantastic housing delivery and good quality.
Thanks, Mike. Alex, what one or two things would you most like Janice to be finding out about councils' house building programmes?
So I think what would really help, and this very much boils down to a local level, but just to have very simple local plans in place. So yeah, making sure that we're not just dealing with a site-by-site sort of approach, that we are that more strategic look at it, making sure that areas for growth, renewal, and areas that should be protected are all very much defined. And I suppose we will see more of this come out from the planning white paper and whatnot. But I think that will be really very useful, because what that does, it allows the efforts of all partners to be focused.
There's almost a Canute-like character to that call for clarity around planning right now. But hopefully the planning reform will play through eventually. David, the research is going to get underway shortly, we hope. What would you most like to know about what LGA members are doing around direct delivery?
Well, I think building on Janice's work already around who's doing it and what they're doing, a really good analysis of who's doing it, but also good practice. And I really like to echo what Mike was saying about pushing an open door and relationships, because certainly in my time in local government, the best way to get things done is if you've got relationships. Usually they're personal relationships, probably not only at the top of organisations but further down as well. So you've got to make sure you've got the right partners who are on board with the same agenda and who are prepared to work with you on that shared vision.
Thanks very much, David. Okay, Janice, over to you. What are you most excited or most anticipating finding out about direct delivery?
Well, I think would be great to find out is how councils have moved on. I mean, what they've learned, what they've been able to achieve. And I think, as ever, it's wide and deep. So wide is actually finding out how many councils, what they're doing, more detail of their companies, what the companies are up to, or their other activities, so that can be shared. And I think that forms a really strong base for local government to feel confident that each council's not on its own, and there's also another council that's probably looked at the same issue or progressed it a bit further. So just trying to find ways of councillors and officers to be able to speak to each other and see that breadth. But I think also what our research has done, and what we'd hope to do again, is to take a deep dive into some councils and find out how it's really working for them. Because we also think that that gives councils we were also told actually by the ministry that it was the detail that we had in our case studies and the round tables that we reported in our reports that really gave flesh to them, to understanding what the issues were. And they said in a lot of research reports, it's all a bit general. But what they liked about ours was there was so much they could really get into it, and they really helped them understand by proxy, you know, what was going on. And I think if we can repeat that by, obviously it's important to think about the right case studies, what do people really want to know about? And I think we've had some great thoughts today about aggregation, about leadership, working together. Also, it'd be quite helpful to know, you know, what lessons have been learned. If you were going to do this again, you know, what would you do differently? Because I think that's also important. It's not all about success. It's all about learning from, you know, learning from the past. So I think that's what we would like to do. And we think that that, again, would move everybody forward. That's the intention, is to share that experience and move everyone forward again, another step.
It always takes a courageous body or person to admit to mistakes, but obviously the sector can learn most by some real honesty in that area as well. Absolutely. Learning lessons learned during the last 5-6 years would be really useful. Janice, I'm going to let you have the last word. That was it. It's hard to believe, but an hour has flashed by, and we have to let our audience get back to their work and put some of what they've learned today into action. It's been an unusual session for us at the Voice of Authority. It's been largely a crowdfunder for Janice's research, but I hope, audience, that you've got a taste for it, and that we've encouraged you to open your corporate wallets and support Janice's work. And also that you're taking away a lot of learning. I mean, the panel has been magnificent in helping us understand the trends in councils building homes. And on behalf of our viewers, thank you. Thank you, Councillor David Renard of Swindon Council and the LGA. Thank you, Dr. Janice Morphet of Bartlett School of Planning at UCL. And thank you, Alex Eisted at Morgan Sindall. And thank you, of course, my co-sponsor today, Mike Diath at HTA. And thanks most of all to you out there in Zoom land, our viewers. We've got a raft of questions still that we've left hanging, I'm afraid, but our panel has kindly agreed to respond to them by email, and we'll circulate their answers via social channels over the coming days. We'll be back in a week with our session, What Makes a Good Council Investment Strategy? And you can register for that and watch the video of this session and all our other webinars at thevoiceofauthority.co.uk. If you'd like to get involved in these sessions as a sponsor or as a speaker, please email me at toby@threefox.co.uk. Meanwhile, from our panel, from me, and from everyone at Three Fox, good afternoon.